And welcome back to TL Talks Podcast. I am TL. As usual, it's good to have you. Have a seat, get comfortable. Before we get started, I just want to remind you to like and subscribe. Appreciate it in advance. My first segment is called The Thought of the Day. My thought of the day for this month is just the fact that we have more in common with each other than we would assume. And the only way to figure that out is to have conversations with each other. So I've learned this as an adult. The older that I get, especially with podcasting, is just pretty much whoever you talk to from any walk of life or different background or race, etc., you most likely have more in common with them than you would assume. And the only way to figure that out is to have a real conversation with them. Not, hey, how you doing? Have a nice day. A real conversation, where you sit down, talk to them about, where they're from or just something deeper than, kind of the normal, just passing by conversation. And so that's my thought of the day. It is very true, or it's rang true for me. I'm 41 years old, and so I know a few things. And that's one thing that I've definitely learned is that we just have more in common with each other than we realize. And the only way to get to the bottom of that and figure that out and learn from each other is to have real conversations. My next segment is called If I Were President. This segment's just about, I'm never going to run for president of the United States, but if I did, these are things that I would do that just kind of irk me or I would change. And so this month's If I Were President has to do with spam mail. So if you're like me, you deal with spam mail on a daily basis, whether it's in your inbox for email or in your literal mailbox outside. And if you knew how many emails, unread emails are in my email inbox, it might give you anxiety. Most of emails are kind of spammy. And then the one that I'm referring to, though, if I were president, is the stuff in the mail. Because literally, I don't know how many trees have been used, wasted, just to send me crap that I don't want. And so I don't know why that's a thing, to be honest with you. I understand kind of the email one because a lot of times they ask you, hey, do you mind giving us your email, to put it on file? And then, voila, you're getting spam emails every week for the rest of your life. So that one kind of makes sense because you kind of co-signed for it. Maybe not intentionally, but you did. But the one in my mailbox, fuck that. I mean, I'll pull out of my mail 10 things and 8 of those would be spam. It's ridiculous. Like there's no nobody's policing it. They just send you crap that you're probably going to throw away and nobody cares. And I don't know why nobody cares. It seems like a waste of time and trees and resources. But if I were president, there would be a way to opt out of that. There would be a national freaking registrar, whether it's an app on your phone or something you do online, like registering to vote. And you would just say, I don't want any of that. I don't want any spam mail the rest of my life. And I'll even pay money for it. I would pay money. I would pay money out of my pocket for a lifetime ban of spam mail. That's how serious I am about it. So that's what I have for If I Were President. Moving on to TLRantz. So TLRantz is a segment that I do about things that bother me or annoy the crap out of me, and so hopefully you enjoy. TLRantz has something to do with something pretty serious, which is school shootings. So we've seen school shootings happen for a while now. Thankfully, they don't happen like often, but they happen often enough. And when they happen, they're so ridiculous and so sad that these are happening. Whether it doesn't matter who does it really. It just matters that what's being done. So these school shootings result in young lives being taken senselessly, and so like I said, it doesn't really matter who does it. It just matters that it's happening. And in my opinion, if the powers that be cared enough about that not happening anymore, there would be more action taken. And so we all know that one of the saddest things that could happen is taking a young life that didn't even get to experience life yet, and that's what's happening in these school shootings. And you hear about, several kids dying or being injured. Bless you, Jackson. or, the most recent one, there was more than that. There were over a dozen kids killed. And it's just so ridiculous, so sad, so tragic every time. And I think I'm at the point now in my life at age 41 where I'm just tired of. I'm tired of, people saying thoughts and prayers. I'm tired of, I'm basically tired of how our society handles it. And I think that things have been done. I've heard people say, there's been measures that have been taken in schools to try to prevent that. But here, listen, man, it's about results, right? And if the results are that this is still happening pretty often, whatever we've done isn't enough. And so you have to ask yourself at a certain point, your common sense has to kick in and say, if what we've done isn't enough to actually stop it from happening, how much do we truly care about these school shootings happening? And so that's my TLRantz for the month. Before we get into our interview, we're going to talk about football briefly, NFL, Cleveland Browns, and my team, the Denver Bandits, out of the WNFC. So for the Browns, the big question is of course around Deshaun Watson. He has 24. I think he has 24 civil cases against him for sexual misconduct. Recently, they announced that 20 of those cases have been settled. There's two ways to look at that. The first way to look at that is that if he was innocent, he wouldn't have settled, because what is there to pay somebody money for if you never did anything? The other way to look at it is if you just want it to be done with and just move on with your life, and you have a lot of extra money like Deshaun Watson has, then you just pay them money just to make them go away, basically. So you can look at it both ways. But that's the huge question. He's the guy we kind of gambled our future on. We gave him the most guaranteed money in NFL history for a quarterback. And so people are saying they're looking for a significant – the NFL is looking at a significant suspension. Unprecedented has been thrown out there. And so I expect him to be suspended anywhere from 8 games to a full year. Of course, as a Browns fan, I hope it's on the lower end. But at the same time, the way this is being handled, this is how society, specifically the NFL, handles things like this. Is it comes down to saving face and appeasing the masses, basically. And so NFL at the end of the day is about money, unfortunately, which drives me crazy. But it comes down to them saving face, them not, their brand not being tarnished, and then also what's going to appease the masses. So a lot of people are going to say Deshaun Watson should be banned from the NFL permanently. People on one far side are going to say that. Other people are going to say, yeah, he deserves a suspension, but not to lose his whole career. And so there's a whole bunch of different opinions. But wherever those opinions, the kind of the middle ground, probably lands where the NFL will take action. And so I'm just looking forward to getting it over with, to be honest with you. I'm a hardcore Browns fan. I can't wait for the season. We have an awesome team, even if we have to play without Deshaun for a while. But this just looming over our heads is not ideal for a lot of reasons as a Browns fan. And so I just wanted them to get it over with, give him a suspension, so we know what we're dealing with. We can move on as a team and hopefully move Baker Mayfield sooner than later so he can move on with his life. So that's my Browns update. Lastly, before we get into the interview, Denver Bandits. So since I last talked to you guys, the most recent news with the Denver Bandits is that we made the playoffs. We finished the season 6-0 this year. The playoffs were in San Diego, California, which is not ideal from a financial standpoint, but it is what it is. And so we all traveled to San Diego, and we had to play 2 games in 3 days, which is the current format, which is very hard to do. We did do that successfully. Whether or not that's a good idea for women's football is debatable. In the first game, we played Las Vegas. If you remember, we beat Las Vegas 10-6 in Denver in the regular season. Really close game. Could have went either way. You could say that we got lucky to win that game. And so in the playoffs is like we could easily lose this team that's looking for revenge. Well, the way the game played out was kind of like that. So we were down 14-13. We both scored twice, and we had our extra point blocked, which I think they were offsides, but referees are referees. So we were down 14-13, and our offense was struggling to move the ball in the second half. So it looked like it was very likely or possible that we're going to lose this game 14-13 to Las Vegas, and that was just going to be really hard to swallow. Well, luckily for us, we threw a deep pass in the second half. Our quarterback, Tori Tagaloa, has a really good arm, and she threw a pass down the middle of the field. And that pass was touched by the safety. She jumped up and tried to bat it away. But when she touched it, it hit her hand, and it just kind of went on its same path. She reached her hand up, and then it went forward. Well, luckily for us, one of our running backs, Natalie Nix, who recently graduated from Air Force Academy, she was running in that direct line. So when the safety tried to bat the ball, it literally fell right in her hands, like the Immaculate Reception, and she ran for a touchdown. Final score 19-14, Denver Bandits. So in dramatic fashion, we win that game, move on to Saturday. Now, Saturday was going to be the winner of undefeated San Diego Rebellion, 6-0, versus the 3-3 Utah Falcons, the 4 seed. So number 1 versus number 4. We, of course, were at that game. It was later on that night. We played at 3. They played at 7. And I'm not terribly surprised because I said anybody in the West can beat anybody else. But Utah pulled the upset. They beat them, I think it was something like 23-15, somewhere around there. It was a one-score game, but San Diego scored late on a long catch and run by Gutierrez. And so that's how the game played out. Utah upset them, and then now Denver versus Utah Part 3 on Saturday. So for that game, I'm not surprised. I mean, we played them first time 7-6. We won, and Utah played them in the rematch, and Denver won 9-7. Both really razor thin games. And so it's not ideal or easy to beat the same team 3 times in one season, especially if they're a good team. So we had we had a big assignment, and then so Saturday goes down. We play them. It's a very interesting game. It was 14. So they did a trick play. They did a running back pass, which scored a touchdown, I think on 4th down, actually. They got our cornerback to bite up, and then they threw it over her head. And then later on in the game, there was a situation before halftime where we were getting close to scoring a touchdown, but we're running out of time. We didn't have any timeouts. And so we ran this play. We ran to the right, and I think somebody felt very strongly about that call. And so they kind of I just wouldn't say called it audible, but they, said we should run this. Please run this. And so we did. Well, the problem with that play call is there wasn't a plan B for it, basically. So if that run to the right doesn't get a touchdown, the logical thing is to spike the ball so we can kick a field goal before halftime and then go in and, hope for the best in the second half. We didn't do that, unfortunately. And we hurried up onto the field to kick a field goal. It was rushed. We barely missed the field goal because it was rushed. And I think that was the difference in the game, aside from the turnovers. Looking back on it, it kills me because I was on the sideline. I could have spoke up. I could have said, hey, let's spike the ball. And I didn't. And so I don't really have an excuse for that. Marcel could have done it. John could have done it. Ty, Beth, myself. A lot of people could have spoken up and said, spike the ball, and none of us did. And so I don't know why that wasn't in my brain at the time, but it wasn't. And so my ego likes to say, if I had been more of in a control position, like OC or head coach, I would have thought more clearly. But who knows? I'm not going to say that that it would have been different. So that coaching mistake was huge. We all have to take accountability for that. The reason that's such a big deal is because since we missed that field goal, in the second half, we ended up scoring on the first drive, which tied the game 14-14. If we made that field goal, now we're up 17-14. This game ends up going into overtime, and we get the ball first. Our quarterback throws another interception. Utah gets the ball, scores, wins in overtime. So my 2 cents is that we would have won in regulation 17-14. And, it is what it is. I guess you have to learn from it as a coach. You're not perfect. You make mistakes, but it just sucks. We feel like we're a better team than Utah, but they won. They won fair and square. And there's definitely some things to learn from it for next year. And for now, it is what it is. And so we just, that's life. So congratulations to Utah. They won fair and square. They're going to be playing the almighty Texas Elite Spartans this Sunday, I think it is actually. And so good luck to them. They're going to need it. Texas is a juggernaut, and we'll see how that goes. But without further ado, let's get into the interview. My interview this month is with a legendary coach, John Konecki. He is the former Chicago Force head coach and a current head coach for high school in, I think it's Chicago. It's definitely Illinois. That's like a national powerhouse. Like they're, state champion several times. They're a very good team. And so I'm not surprised by that. He's a very good coach. And it sounds like he has a very good coaching staff from the interview. He also was the head coach of Team USA previously. And so just a really decorated head coach in women's football, out of women's football. Really awesome guy to talk to. I had the privilege of going to Chicago to visit him and his team when they played Boston a lot of years ago when I coached my former team, and that was really cool too. Talk about that, and hopefully you enjoy the interview. Without further ado, here is Coach John Konecki. All right. So I'd like to welcome Coach John Konecki to the TLTALKZ podcast. Coach, it's an honor to have you on. I haven't seen you in a few years, but it's going to be great to catch up with you. So first of all, welcome.
Thanks so much for having me on. I appreciate it. And it was nice to briefly catch up before we jumped on here. I apprate it.
Yes,
Thanks
sir.
for reaching out. It actually means a lot. I appreciate it. And I also should say this, I think it might have been 2017 or 16, where you ended up coming out to one of our games, and I can't remember who it was. It might have been
Boston.
Pittsburgh Basket. Was it a Boston game?
Yeah.
Did we end up winning that game?
No, you barely lost.
I did not end up winning that game. That was a tough one. They were good, and they still are good.
Yeah.
And we had a lot of great battles with them, but I remember that fondly, and I appreciate you reaching out, and it's nice to see that you're still sticking with it and still working with women's football, because it's definitely an awesome adventure, and it's a lot of fun, and it's a definite it's definitely needed in our sporting world.
Yeah, absolutely, man. So the way I want to do the interview is I kind of wanted to start with your background. So I obviously know you're a well-renowned football coach. I don't know much about you as a person. I don't know where you grew up, how you were raised or where you were raised, all the things that kind of amalgamated into the man that you are, the man that and coach that you are today. So if you don't mind, I don't want to get too nosy,
Sure.
But let us know whatever you're willing to share about your upbringing.
Yeah, I grew up on the south side of Chicago. Pretty normal. My dad was a Vietnam vet. Okay. I think a lot of that. And my mom was and then he went into business for himself. And my mom was a nurse, and my parents were. My dad since passed away, but my mom and dad, they made sure that they gave us everything that we could, that they could afford. So they put us through, which is not uncommon where we grew up, to put us through private schools. And at the same time, I have a younger sister and my brother, a younger brother and younger sister. And we got really heavily involved in sports. And I guess for that point in time, not as involved in sports, I guess today, as like my own children are. It seems like they're almost professional in comparison to what we were doing. And I started playing football, and I fell in love with it. And I mean, it's a great game. And as I would tell everybody who played it, that it's a great game because the more effort you put into it, the more you get out of it. And you can't find that in a lot of other sports. And I would tell this to the women, I tell it to the young men that I coach, it's still to this day. That like, hey, if you try to swing a golf club harder, like, it doesn't go better. Try to shoot a basketball harder. Yeah, it works, right? Like you're swinging a baseball bat, it just doesn't work. But football, I really gravitated towards it because you could just give effort, right? And I was a bigger kid, and I wasn't. And I just be honest with you, I wasn't very good at anything else except for football. And later on, I grew into my body and became much better. But so I started playing, and I ended up going to an all-boys Catholic school in the South Side of Chicago, and actually I ended up getting hurt. So when I was in high school, and actually in grade school too, so I bruised my spinal cord twice playing football. And so I got retired. I got medically retired from playing football, which was devastating. And so I played other sports. I was involved in other things, but I never had the same amount of success as I did when I was playing football. And quite frankly, I never find the same level of camaraderie and all the other things that were associated with it. And long and short of it, I go through high school and then I go to college, and I was going to be a police officer, and some things happened, and I made some decisions about what my future was going to be, and I was training for the power test, and I had some issues with it the first time, and I just decided that I'd rather go in education than be in law enforcement. And they're both my brother was just state trooper, and because I really liked the idea of coaching, and I did a little bit of coaching in high school, and so then I got involved. I went to school and I became a teacher, and I started coaching. That was 22 years ago, and I was really fortunate to work with a couple Hall of Fame coaches in the high school side very early on in my career. And then I met up with some younger guys. We're all about the same age, and we ended up at the school that I'm presently at. Got there about 2007, and since then we've been to 3 state championships, 4 Final Fours. We've made the playoffs 15 consecutive years. We've 25 kids at Division I scholarships, and we've had 3 guys playing in the NFL, 1 first-round draft choice. Had the 1 fullback in this draft. It tore his ACL right before the start of the draft. And I had one of my former offensive linemen our practice today, who just finished up his rookie camp with Tampa Bay Buccaneers, and we had an undrafted free agent with the Chicago Bears as well. So, I guess that's a long and short of it. But yeah, so I ended up coaching football, and I'm a full-time administrator, and it's a great game. And I think at the end of the day, like when I pull it all the way, why sports? For me, sports kept me on the straight and narrow, right? It gave me purpose, and then as I've gotten to become older, I've realized that this is what I need to be doing. I need to be working with kids who are like myself, and giving them an outlet to, convince them to continue playing football. But really what I want them to do is continue their education while they're playing football. Right. And so they'll be able to do a lot of counseling, and, finding, young men who, that's their path. They want to play sports, but at the same time, obviously we get involved a lot heavily with the academic side and the importance of taking care of your academics so we can continue on with their education while playing football. We have kids, playing all across the United States, and are, doing a great job. And in that same time, I was coaching the boys. I was also coaching the Chicago Force, and that was a labor of love and a lot of fun. So it was nonstop football for me yearly. I had like 4 weeks off in December. My break time was, and then it was you hit the ground running, and that was So that's a little bit about me.
Okay, so you were raised in a military family.
No, I wouldn't say a military family. My dad was a Vietnam vet.
Okay.
So, my dad, and then, but there was, obviously there was a lot of structure and discipline, and my dad was in charge, and, and he let everybody know that.
Gotcha. And so you grew up with a Vietnam vet as your dad, and then you played a lot of sports as a kid. The one sport that fit the most was football, for different reasons. And then you said you had some injuries with your back. You ended up having to retire from football from playing, and then eventually started coaching. When you said you work in administration, does that mean you have some kind of role with the school?
So I'm a full-time administrator in school. So I'm in charge of several different departments. So I supervise and evaluate the instructors and ensure that the curriculum is being taught the way that we want it to be taught. So yeah, that's my. In addition to being a head football coach, that's my full-time job in education.
9 to 5. Gotcha. Okay.
Yeah.
And did you go to school for that, or how did you?
I did. Yeah. So I got a bachelor's degree in secondary education in the history of social sciences, and then I went back and got my master's. Shortly after I graduated, with my undergrad.
Okay, gotcha. That makes sense. So, as you know, when I met you or heard about you before I met you, I knew you as Coach John Konecki, Chicago Force. Chicago Force is a top team in the WFA. He's a top coach in the country. And so that's why I flew my Italian butt out to Chicago to watch something in person. But I don't really know much past that, right? So I think I heard through the grapevine that you ended up being a coach of an Olympic team that wasn't the U.S., which we should have some fun talking about that. But I know about that, you coaching that team. But outside of the Chicago Force, I don't know. I just know that you coach a local high school. And you guys are pretty successful. But I don't know if you coached any other women's teams or if you've coached different high schools or it's just been that one main high school that you've been with.
Yeah. So I've been, I coached at several different high schools. But the main two, I guess, would be, they're both in the far south suburbs of Chicago. I was at home with Flossmoor, and then which is really where I learned the offense that we ran, was with a guy by the name of Tom Bailey. And we were there for a couple of years, and this was in our early 20s. And then we went to another school where I'm presently at, which is Crete Monee High School. And that's in, a little further south in the south suburbs. As far as coaching is concerned, I've coached Chicago Force, and then I was the head coach of the U.S. national team in 2000, women's U.S. national team in 2010 and 2013. And then in between that, I was the head coach of the men's Swedish national team, and I did that for a couple of years. And then 2017, I was the offensive coordinator for the Australian national team.
That's what I was thinking of, the Australian one. Okay.
Yeah, so had a lot of fun, and a lot of fun growing the game, and it was really a lot of fun doing the international stuff. That was a blast. It's definitely a unique perspective on because when you're in a country where football's yours, and it's you take some things for granted, and I always was appreciative of how much knowledge my contemporaries had of the game and how much work they put into it, because it wasn't like they could just go to the local high school and talk to a football coach, or they had to really seek it out. And then, they brought into the different countries, and it's fun to watch how the game has grown. And the nice part about for me is that I could I have college coaches coming in on my building, and I could talk to the college coaches. I'm like, did you ever know, do you know that they play? And a lot of the guys said no, that early on, that anybody who's playing football outside of the United States. So I was able to have some conversations. And now you're seeing more and more, the USA football obviously has a lot to do with that, but now you're seeing more and more foreign-born players in the NFL, than you'd seen previously. Outside of some of the kids that were coming from, the Polynesia and those sort of island countries that would make their way to the West Coast. But now you're seeing more of the game spread, globally, which is really cool. And honestly, it's a really fun to watch, because we've already seen it obviously happen in baseball. We've seen it happen in basketball, and hockey's been going on forever. But it's fun to watch, the game definitely grow and explode. And it's a unique game because, it takes, I would always tell everybody is that, it takes all body types, right? Like big guys, small guys, right?
Yeah.
Little people, fast people, right? Like strong, like it's, and so you can be a lot of different molds, and, you can play the game. And that's what's so cool about our game versus like, I don't want to, basketball is always kind of my go-to, but like in basketball, like if you're not 6'7", it's tough. That's a tough game to play.
Yeah.
I mean, those guys are, they're amazing athletes, but like you don't see a lot of Muggsy Bogues in the world, right? Like, those guys are they're the story because they're the exception rather than the rule, right? And so, whereas football, it's really unique because you have all those different, different body types of different people, and you then throw kickers into the equation, right, which are totally different, deal. And who are some of my favorite people in the world, kickers. That's why the game is pretty awesome. You get opportunity to do a lot of neat stuff with it. And so for the longest time, I just honestly, for me, Terry, I just wanted to be the best. I just wanted to be the best football coach that I could be, and I never wanted any of my players to say that I didn't know something or that I was not knowledgeable about something. So I just attacked it, right? And now guys use terms like triple down or 10x. I just attacked it, right? Like I just went after it, and I said, well, I'm going to be made it like a mission of mine to just be the best football coach that I can be. So I just kept seeking out more and more opportunities to coach football. And, and it's paid great dividends for me with the women, and obviously continues to pay dividends with me with the high school boys.
Understood. So let me ask you this. Aside from you seeking out coaching opportunities, how did you attack like learning? You know what I'm saying? Like learning the game in a 360, because a lot of guys, if you talk to some guy at the bar, he'll think he knows football like the back of his hand,
sure.
Right? He'll watch the ball the whole play, and he sees the TV version of a game, right? But as football coaches, we know that there's much more that goes into it. There's things that are off camera that nobody sees, and so you kind of, unless you're a football coach, you don't really get that full view. So I'm curious, for you evolving yourself as a coach, you seem like a go-getter, to say the least. And so how are you able to attack that and develop yourself into a well-rounded coach and kind of fill in the blanks?
So I started with books, and then that would, like most people, I was buying a lot of books, and then I was on a lot of, early days of message boards. I was on a lot of message boards, which, which were awesome because there was a lot of guys who just like, well, how do you attack this and how do you do that? And then invariably a lot of those things would kind of devolve into, I have the chalk last, so therefore I'm the smartest, right? And but there was in that early days, there was a message board where there was a whiteboard, and we could go on there, and the coach, I didn't even know these guys, just their screen names. So we would go on there and we would draw for hours, right? Like, well, what about this? What about that? And that was just one example. But from there, I then would, watch videos of college guys or high school guys, and then they'd at the end, like, hey, if you ever have any questions, just call. And I was like, well, I'm going to call them. So I would call these guys, right? And I would call and I would just talk to them on the phone. And then I just started to develop my network, around here of coaches. And then we are constantly working, the phones and things are way easier now, like with things like obviously Twitter and Instagram, but really Twitter, you get a lot of, useful information off. But then, I think that most of it has just been becoming like, most of the education became from talking to coaches and asking a lot of questions and then finding out what it is that I wanted to do and how it worked inside of what it is that I wanted to do.
Gotcha.
And so there's a lot of great things out there. And for me, my rules are very simple. Does it fit what we do?
Yeah.
Right? Is it going to, and this is like, if there was a hallmark, is it going to change what the offensive line does? Because if it's going to change what the offensive line does, we're not doing it. So based upon after we've done our initial install. So I would just I asked a lot of questions, watched a lot of videos, read a lot. Now it's just really a lot of today it's conversational. But I mean the DVD, I have jackets of DVDs over here, and just like these big the big DVD CD holders are like this, right? I mean, we were just ripping CDs and DVDs. And we'd be trading them left and right. And that was really, that's how I learned a ton of stuff. And then, and then obviously, and I tell this to young guys all the time, like, hey, when you see old timers at coaches clinics, we're just sitting there and they want to talk to you. They do. They want to talk to you. Talk to those guys. They have forgot more football than you'll ever know, right? And then invariably, when you get to start talking to them, those guys really help you out with some of the soft skills. Like, what did you do if you have like a kid whose family might have been a problem, or like, what did you this? And I always felt like those guys for me have been, and I still, the guy that I originally started coaching with, and at home with Flossmoor, I still talk to him all the time, right? We don't talk about X's and O's anymore. We just talk about, I have this problem. How would you address this? What do you think about this? Is what I'm thinking, and that's really, it's kind of went from there. Pandemic was a huge growth opportunity for me. Because I decided that I was going to watch, a ton of, so there's guys that I like Joe Gibbs from Washington, well, they're the Commanders now. At that point in time, they were the other team name, right? But Bill Belichick would say something effective. Who is the most difficult guy to prepare for? And he'd say it's Joe Gibbs because he would run one play one time and 5 years later, you would see that same play again, but you wouldn't see that play for 5 years or that formation for 5 years, but you had to prepare for it. So the offseason, I spent my time studying. If that gave Bill Belichick fits, I spent my time watching, old, Washington Commanders films with Joe Gibbs and Joe Bugle as the offensive line coach. And that was the other thing too, to further it. I would find guys like Chip Kelly, who was at Oregon at the time, and they had Jeremiah Mastroli, the West Coast Tim Tebow, as I referred to him. I would stay up late and watch those guys, and then I would chase those coaches wherever they were at, wherever their film was at, and I would just try to find as much stuff as I could. And then as the college coaches were coming through, we had three consecutive All-Americans. So I had every coach in the United States in my building at some point.
Oh.
Every coach that you know of that's on the sidelines today, they were in my building at some point in time, whether they were a offense coordinator, defense coordinator, or head coach, they were in my building. And because we later on, one of those guys ended up becoming a first-round draft choice. So I learned a lot from those guys too. So I'll give you for example, we had Laquan Treadwell is the young man's name, who was first-round draft choice. He's currently playing for the Jacksonville Jaguars. He just came off an enormous junior season, and I was talking to, and I'm not name dropping here, but this is just an example. Mike Vrabel was recruited for Ohio State at the time. And I said, "What, Coach?" And at this point in time, I said, "Coach, what would you do with a guy like Laquan?" Because at this point, for us, he was playing wide receiver. He's like, you should put him in the backfield. I'm like, put him in the backfield? I've never thought of that. He goes, well, that's what the St. Louis Rams did to us when he was at New England. And he went on and explained it. But it was just that conversation totally opened up my mind, right? So I can do this with this guy. It blew up. I was like, wait a second, hold on. No one said I thought that was a rule, right? Yeah. So fast forward then, Terry, this is crazy, right? So Mike Vrabel gives us that he gives us that little nugget. Fast forward to the state championship game, play number 2. Laquan Treadwell's in the backfield. We flip him the ball, and he scampers off for a 69-yard touchdown, right? Yeah. And it wouldn't have happened if I didn't ask the question, right? And I think that probably even further way is you have to be humble enough to ask the question, right? And be okay with asking the question, because people are willing to give you it. They may be answering a question that you're not asking, but in it, there may be a nugget. So for example, we run the swinging gate, on extra point, and I have this old timer DVD, and he talks about it. He goes, why we run the swinging gate? And he's like, obviously it's rhetorical. He's like, watch this. He goes, when you bring the guys back in, the kids don't rush. And he showed 10 clips in a row, and he was, to a person, it was like, oh my gosh, they actually don't. So when the gate starts out here, they come back in, the defenders wouldn't rush. And I see it often, right? Now that was just a little, and then the Oregon guys came in, and I remember talking to them, and we started talking no huddle stuff because they knew they were running it, and they turned me on to this book by Lieutenant Colonel David Grossman called On Combat and On Killing. Now those are both really, those titles are exactly what you would think they're about. Yeah. However, inside of that, they talk about how the special forces and military are trained. And then we took a lot of what they were doing, because that's what they were doing at Oregon, and we applied it to our own practices, right? So that we were able to play ridiculously fast. And there was a physiology behind it. And furthermore, then we could explain to the kids the physiology. I could explain to the women the physiology, and then how we were going to go about to actually catch our breath and combat some of the issues that we were dealing with. So when you see it, old films of us playing in Chicago Force, and you look at 2013, WFA championship. I mean, we could have played 14 quarters. It didn't matter. Yeah. There was, we were just going to run you to death. Yeah. And metaphorically speaking, of course, right? We were just, but so I guess, that's a long answer to a really, really easy question. So I guess that, in summary, ask questions and read and find everything that you could possibly find, because there's answers in there, and then know what it is that you want to do. Right. And then try to apply those things accordingly.
Yeah. And like you said, you have deal breakers, right? So beforehand, before you ask the question, you already know you're asking the question, can it fit what we do? And number 2, will it change what our offensive line does? And if based on those answers, it tells you if you can or cannot use it. And you go from there. So yeah. I love that. So I want to talk to you about a lot of stuff. Hopefully we can fit in an hour.
Sure.
Hopefully you're not pressed for time. It's
No,
funny.
I'm good.
It's funny that you asked me if 7:30 was okay, because I'm a night owl. So I'm up till like 1 or 2 every night. So 7:30 was like a laughable question. So hopefully, as long as you're not tired, we're good.
I'm good.
All right. So I have a whole bunch of questions written down here. Let's get into, let's see, what makes most sense to get in next. Yeah, let's go ahead and you gave me a couple of pre-questions, which I appreciate. So let's talk about you studying football during the pandemic.
All right, let's talk about it. Yeah. Oh man, I learned a lot. No, I learned a lot. I mean, and really I learned a lot about a lot of different things during the pandemic, right? But from a football standpoint, I went back and I started to watch. I was alluded to watch a ton of Joe Gibbs and Joe Bugle stuff from the old Hogs days, and I just spent a lot of time so I really focused on like deception and motions and shifts, and so my friend and I would go down rabbit holes every day, and so I would have it. And I would just I'd throw on old USFL films. I started watching run and shoot stuff again, like Miles Davis, and which then turns you into brings you to like a whole nother series of questions like, can we run the run and shoot? Who else is running the run and shoot? Then you find a team out in Coronado, California, who's running the run and shoot, and you're messaging the coach there, asking them how it is they do different things, and then which then led me to like this rabbit hole of like single wing stuff, which all football is predicated on the single wing, and if you don't ever have a quarterback, you better figure out what you're going to do with your offense. And I would suggest that everybody at least take some time to figure out the single wing or components of it, because it's a really fascinating offense, and you have two quarterbacks back there, and so I spent a lot of time just spent grinding football nonstop, and it was. Really at that point in time, I didn't ever know if we were ever going to get back to football. And then, where I spent a lot of my time after got where I wanted to with my X's and O's, I spent a lot of my time on sports performance stuff now. So then I end up down, got a couple of guys that I spend a lot of time following. Is one guy's a strength coach out of Minnesota, University of Minnesota. His name's Cal Dietz. He does some amazing stuff. And then there's a guy out of Chicago. His name's Chris Corfist. And he's my resident speed expert, and we've adopted a lot of the different things that those guys do, and and then obviously been apply those different things to our team. So I spent a lot of time. I spend I think more time on the how do you assist your athletes to be in better shape than I actually probably do at this point in time in X's and O's, because we do know what we want to run X's and O's wise, but you can't do it if you players can't be ready to play on Friday or Saturday. So we spent a lot of time on, and I don't have a full-time strength coach. I'm the strength coach, right, along with my other coaches, right? So you have to figure out how you can work those things in so that your players. So if I were going to go back to coaching a women's team tomorrow, we'd be spending time on our neck exercises, because women don't have the same density of trapezius muscles. We'd be doing calf raises because we started to have Achilles injuries issues, and we'd be doing a lot of lateral movements because women had more of a predisposition to ACL injuries. Now I found all those things out from coaching women, right? But then we had to incorporate those things into our own training regimens so that we were giving ourselves the best opportunity to be as strong as physically as possible and as healthy as possible when it came to game day. Gotcha.
Before we get into my nosy Terry questions, last one I want to touch on that was pre-thought out was your love of special teams.
Oh,
let's get into that.
Yeah, I love special teams. I absolutely love it.
I've been told.
Yeah, I think that everybody spends a lot of time on the offense and defense, and that's great. But I don't always feel like the same amount of time is devoted to special teams, and it is an explosive area in football. So, and you can change the complexion of a game with an onside kick or a punt return, or a drop punt or a block punt, right? or a kick return that, you take back to the house, and you can change all of those different things. But we spend an inordinate amount of time on special teams, and we do that because I always believe that if everybody's at equal at offense and defense, where's the area that you have to find your area that you're going to win in? And I always felt like you can still do feel like that you can win in special teams because if you devote time to it, right? And so you have to do that. And I spend, even with the boys, we spend half an hour a day on different special teams. We kick onsides all the time. We have a very simple, return system, but everybody has to know all the rules so that there's no, like what's the number one job of the kick return team, right? It's to actually recover the ball, right? Like that's the number one job, right? Like, and then everybody who can return the ball, like everybody needs to know, like these guys can return the ball. We're not return guys, but we have to get on the ball.
Yeah.
What do we do if there's, a first touch, or if, on extra points at the high school level, it's why you should always just throw the ball up in the air if you go for two, because they can't return it for 2 points. It's a dead ball. Right. And so you should always just, so you should always find those different areas, in my opinion, where you can be creative. And then furthermore, with the special teams piece, I still do feel like you can be much more creative in those areas, which in turn keeps your athletes more engaged in the process, because you're doing some unique things. So last year we did a drop kick onside, and we were actually, so the rule only states that you have to be 6 and 4, right? 4 on one side, 6 on the other, and but it doesn't say anything about everybody being static, right? So if everybody runs together, and these 4 never pass over here, and the kicker stays right here, and you can drop kick it, you can run and kick. So we did that and recovered the ball, and and so I mean, and why not, right? And so if you can do it, and we spent a lot of time on it, and it just was always something to me that we had a defense coordinator, or I'm sorry, a special teams coordinator in Chicago, who made special teams, Danny Abramowitz, who made special teams fun in like the late 80s and early 90s. And obviously we had Devin Hester. And then you just, as a coach, you start to look at it, this is an area that you can really have a major impact on the game. And if you don't spend time on it, you will lose. And I've lost games because of special teams. I think we all have, right? But when you go back to it, you have to then say to yourself, did we spend enough time? So I'll take you one step further. When we put together the U.S. national team, the first person that after you get quarterbacks, first person I told everyone we had to select, long snapper.
Yeah.
Try to play a football game without a long snapper. See what happens.
Yeah, not good.
It's a disaster, right? It's a total disaster, right? So like you find your quarterback, and then who's the next person? Long snapper. So for us in 2013, it was Mickey Eddy, and she was obviously an outstanding outside linebacker, and but she was an unbelievable long snapper. So I mean, like that's the level of that's the level of importance that I put on. And then you want to make sure you have a good kicker. Obviously somebody who can flip the field is awesome. If you don't, then you better be very creative with what you're going to do. And I don't always have great kickers on the boys' side, but we have to do a lot of different creative things to be able to move the ball. So we messed around, and when I was with the Australian national team, I kicked every day, and they taught me how to kick like, I personally kicked every day. They laughed at me every day, but those guys can kick really well because of their background in AFL and rugby. Right. And so I brought that back and taught all my boys how to kick, how we were kicking it with the national team. And, we've had a lot of fun with it. And, it's an easy way it's an easier way in many ways to kick a football. And, it just takes a little bit of time how you hold your hands and push the ball down. It's just a little bit different. Yeah. Kick the ball here in the U.S.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. Me and you both know there's 3 phases to a football game: offense, defense, special teams. Unfortunately, a lot of teams do overlook special teams. They don't give it nearly as much time as offense and defense, which is to their detriment. And we see that. But for some reason, it doesn't really sink into the psyche of a lot of coaches that was the difference, or that we could improve that. I'm not going to change the complexion of football coaching in the U.S., but all I can do is try to help my team, right? So if I'm coaching Denver Bandits, I'm on their coaching staff, all I can do is just stress it to my head coach and hope that he listens. You know what I'm saying? At the end of the day.
Yeah, I would tell any young coach out there, if you're looking for a way to, change the complexion of your football game, either don't spend time on special teams or spend a ton of time on special teams.
Yeah.
I'll tell you the spending a ton of time is a lot better than not spending any time.
Yeah.
And it's just, and furthermore, I'm a big believer that you can steal your opponent's practice time. So if I have 7 different onside kicks, you have to prepare for all 7 of those different onside.
It's true.
If I bring in 3 different extra point looks, it costs me nothing. But if I show you different looks, you have to prepare for all those looks. So I'm now then stealing your practice time.
That's what Utah Falcons used to do to us. So Utah Falcons used to do a lot of onside kicks. And then like you said, I would have to spend time preparing for that in practice. And then that's less time that we're preparing for their triple option, which nobody else runs. And it's just like, you've already lost the game before it starts.
Yes.
And almost all my teams until the Denver Bandits never had great numbers. We never had 11v11 in practice. And so, it's just
tough.
When you're playing a top team, you need certain things.
Yeah.
And, fortunately, we're there now, but I never had it before. And so I think it's a good and bad thing. I look at it like it's good because it forced me as a coach to be more creative with how I'm going to do the most with my time in practice without good numbers. But then it's bad because, it's almost like if you never had it, you don't know what you're missing. But once you have it, you're like, oh shit, like this is how it's supposed to be. We're supposed to have, a full offense, a full defense. We're supposed to be able to run, a watered down version of Utah's offense. So our defense is seeing, kind of the concepts at least. So then when they go to play the game, it's not the first time. And so, there's probably maybe a dozen women's teams in the nation that have numbers like that, which I wish there was more. But for now, I'm just glad that we're one of them. You know what I mean? And so that might be selfish, but whatever. Next thing I want to talk to you about is the Arkansas coach. So you talked about doing onside kicks. Since you're a nerd of the game, like myself, I'm sure you're aware of the coach in Arkansas that's like renowned for always doing onside kicks, always going for it on 4th down. He had crazy success in high school. So what do you think of his philosophy on it? Do you think it's overkill, or do you appreciate and respect it?
I picked up the phone and talked to him before.
Okay.
And I appreciate it. I appreciate anybody who looks at something differently, and it works and if it works for you, then great. Right.
Yeah.
I don't know if I can buy into never punting, right? That part, I'll go for it more than most, but I don't know about the never punting. I know what the numbers say, but I also, it's hard to turn the ball over in the 5, right? You have first and goal for the other team. I don't think that's something I'm willing to do. It is a different way to look at it. You would definitely be, if you're trying to get, you're changing, if you're trying to get 2.5 yards per play, that's a different story. I love kicking onsides. I think it's a great way to go about doing it. But I can't, I know it worked for him, and I can't say that I would jump in whole hog on the
right. Yeah, you wouldn't swallow.
I look at all the numbers, and I think that they're interesting, and it's an interesting thought experiment. But I don't want to lose a game because I didn't punt somewhere. But saying that, right? We've also dropped punt snaps in those zones and lost the game because of it. And then you say to yourself, I should just punt.
Yeah.
That's a different conversation, right? That's it's unique. He obviously had a ton of success, and worked for him.
Gotcha. Next question is about Urban Meyer. So Urban Meyer is actually from the same town that I'm from in Ohio. He obviously coached Ohio State, which is my favorite college team. I'm from Northeast Ohio, and so I'm a fan of his. People have differing opinions on Urban Meyer for different reasons, but you kind of reminded me of him when you're telling your story about how you grew up and then your coaching career, because when you were doing Chicago Force in high school, like you said, you had 4 weeks off per year. And so you're kind of like, whatever that term is, burning the candle at both ends or whatever. So I'm just curious, how has that been for you? Because I know for Urban Meyer, he kind of had to step away from football at different times. He had a hard time not obsessing over football. And then that kind of like hurt his family life. I think you have a wife and at least a son that you talked about. And so has that been a difficult thing for you, or you've been able to balance that pretty well?
Oh, with my wife and my wife and kids, yeah, sure. I've been able to balance it. Yeah,
Okay.
they do really well without me. Yeah, it's obviously tough. I mean, but at the same time, I've always made sure I coach my kids in their sports too. So now I'm coaching. I'm coaching my son's youth football team, right? In the fall, so I coach my team, and then I go to his practices, and I told the guys there, like, hey, I just want to be the world's greatest assistant coach. I don't need any extra response. And then the next thing you know, I'm running a defense. I'm like, I don't run defenses, but fine, I'll run the defense, right? Like, and so when the kids were younger, I was ripping and running a lot, and it started towards the end of my time with the force. It was time for me to walk away, just because I was getting to a place where I was starting to miss things, and I told myself I wouldn't do that.
Right.
Even with, and so that was obviously the team decided to no longer exist. But I mean, at that point in time, everyone kind of knew where my head was at, and because that's a pitfall that I've seen others fall into, and I won't allow that to happen for myself. That's not to say that we don't have our normal things when the football season comes up, because it just we've been really fortunate. It starts right, like we're in summer camp right now, and then we've been fortunate to play into late October for several times, and that's a long time to kind of be you're all in on your team, and you want to be all in your family, but invariably your job is you're coaching, so you go with the job, and you end up missing this and that and the other, and it does take a toll, but I have always said to myself that my kids are involved in stuff, I'm not missing that, right? And so I coach my kids in baseball, and I coach them in football, and my daughter does a bunch of theater stuff. So I ran off the practice field the other day and made it to her play, and I was in a dark theater after a 14-hour day, and it was a great play, but it was one of those things where I was using toothpicks to keep my eyes open. And that wasn't because the content wasn't great. It was just like you do, like you're burning it at both ends, right? You just you get really tired, and you're like, gosh, I should grab the coffee before I came in. But I haven't had a whole lot of problems as far as the balancing of it all. It's just been you got to have somebody who knows that what you want to do, and that they're super supportive of it. And when we first started, it was just about, and it really was, because you don't know any better. Like, it was just like, I just want to win. And then the longer you do it, you realize this is so much bigger than just winning, right? Like, the positive impact, especially at the high school level, that you have with kids, and that you really can turn them into their life into a totally different trajectory. So from that standpoint, it's hard to walk away, or it's hard to argue with what it is that you're doing, right? Because you're just trying to be a good person and do good things for and assist people in any way, shape, or form. Obviously, winning is still important, but it's not my name. It's not the main drive anymore. It's a different sort of. I still want to have success. I want the kids to have success, but I want them to be successful in life. And you don't realize that until you get further along in this thing. And I guess there's an evolution as a coach. And I'll tell you this is a great story. It's a little bit of a segue. An old timer told me once, there's 3 phases to coaching, right? And the first phase is like you're coaching people, your kids, and you're like a older brother, like a cool younger uncle, right? Yeah, that's your first phase. I'm like, all right, I got that. I was in that phase, right? And then there's phase 2. You're the dad right now. That's me, right? Like, I'm in that phase. And then there's phase number 3, grandfather, right? Just a sage, right? And his contention was no phase can overlap, right? Like, you can only be who you are. And so I'm in the second phase, dad, father, right? Like, that's the phase I'm in. And then, I'll get some more gray hair eventually and lose some more hair on the top of my head. And, and then I guess I'll be in the grandfather phase. And in every phase, you have to act in accordance with who you're supposed to be, right? Like, the kids don't expect me to come in and be like, hey guys, and that's just a dated reference. Did you guys watch MTV The Real World last night? That was me when I was, the young, cool, hip coach. Right now, now I'm making dad jokes, right? Like it was like, that's the lamest thing you've ever said. I'm like, that works for me, right? Yeah. And then at the end, you're just kind of like the old guy, and everybody's like, oh, all right. Was he talking? Yeah, he was talking. Yeah, all right. Yeah. Keep it moving, right?
So what stage would you say you were in when you coached Chicago Force?
Oh, I was definitely in phase. I was in phase with the ladies.
Yeah.
Well, I mean, at that point in time, I was probably phase one, but I would say that with that was a totally different deal. I think early on we were, I would say that there was some adversarial piece early on, right? Like, it took several years to then became just a partnership, right? Like everybody bought into what I was selling. And I obviously worked with the women to, give them my best effort all the time. And, and obviously we had tremendous success on the field. We got to a place where, good or bad, we beat somebody by 50 points and we did not play well, right? So somebody said,
I know that feels.
Yeah. Right. And so one of the reporters who's there is like, what do you do? Sammy Versace was just, I just talked to her and she was miserable. You just beat this team by 56. Like, we played terrible. And she knows we played terrible. Yeah. And so I guess with the women, it really became, it was more of a partnership, right? And it evolved into, obviously, I was head coach, but, we moved to a place where it was like, hey, I just want you to be the best possible version of yourself. And I want you to have success. And so you're going to get this for me all the time. And you may not always like it. And, but know that it always comes from a place of, care and, because I want you to be successful in this game.
Gotcha. Very interesting. So when I came to visit you in Chicago, you were in your stage one of the cool uncle.
Yeah, sure.
Sure. But to me, from the outside, I saw this really good football coach that was real authoritarian. You know what I mean? Some would say aggressive or assertive.
Sure. Those are all fair statements. Absolutely.
Yeah. So that's what I saw. And I'm not criticizing it or saying it's right or wrong. It is what it is what it is. But you guys were very successful, and you were the guy at the helm during that time in Chicago. So it's interesting to hear that. I'm never going to forget what you just told me about those different stages, and it makes me wonder. Unfortunately, I think I'm still in the first stage, even though I've been coaching for a while now. But you evolve when you evolve, I guess. So
yeah, I would say too, like, you have to get to a place with coaching that, you grow up, you watch Mike Dick and Bobby Knight, right? And how you were coached, you think everybody wants to be coached that way, or that's the best way.
Right.
And then, you start reading things like Phil Jackson's book, Sacred Hoops. You're like, oh my gosh, did you really do that? Right. Yeah. Like, is that really what you did? And it's a smaller team, so you could have a little bit more flexibility with the individualized piece, or, you read, other things about, how Lombardi was and, how he was early on, or like, how Bill Walsh was with his early 49ers teams, and then how he was when they lost, and then how he was again. And I think the part of coaching that's awesome about it, and I say it all the time, is that it is the only profession where you can get better as you get older, right? Like, heart surgeons, I'm not going to let an 80-year-old guy work.
Yeah.
He may be the greatest heart surgeon in the world, right? But, I mean, it's just not like, and they're going to be pushed out, and they're going to end up in a teaching role. But with us as coaches, like, you can do this forever. And the longer you do it, the more you realize, and just the same in its education, right? It's humanistic. It's ugly. It's messy. It's not always the best. And then as time changes, you have to change. So like the snippet of what you saw, right? Like, my guys who come back, they're like, they're not the same guy you were. When you had me, I'm like, well, I was a lot younger. I was a lot younger. I've been in a field of education. You learn things, and you learn that not everybody works well under that. And obviously, we just we're coming off a pandemic where we're trying to where there was we're especially with students, we sent some students home for 18 months, and it was the worst experience of their life, right? Like, that was like kids that want to be in school because maybe home's not the greatest environment, right? And and then you have to figure out how we navigate those waters. So I'd say with anything, like with coaching, the best part about this is that you continue to evolve, and you try to become the best possible version of who it is that you want to be. And as long as you're authentic to yourself, I think it all works out, right? And I would say this, if you were to poll my players, they'd always tell you that, they always knew that it was never personal, right? It was just always about performance. Like off the field, I walk off the field, I always tell people, I'm a laid back guy. And they do spit takes. I'm like, no, I don't really interact with a whole lot of people. I don't get real aggressive about it, but sports, that's a different story. Like just something about it. There's something about the competitive piece that, you push people to be their best, right? And some players, now what you didn't know is there were players on my team that if I would have got after them, I got after some of my other players, they were completely shut down. So I just didn't say much to those players, right? Like, and that's like, but I knew that. You didn't necessarily know that, but there were certain players on the team like I couldn't yell at. I couldn't. You had to have a conversation, or I'd have to have somebody else have a conversation with them because it would never be received well. So, right. There's a lot of different,
psychology.
There's a lot of plates that you're spinning, right, as a coach. And some players love it. They love being yelled at because I love it. You're not going to get your best. You're not going to get my best performance unless I get angry at you if you're my coach, right? Like, I'll show you, right? But that was me, right? Like, that's who I am. Like, if you told me every day I was doing a terrible job, I'm going to prove to you that I'm not doing it.
Yeah.
Other people need high fives, and that's cool. I'm just not, so then I have to find a coach to be the high five guy, right? And so what I've done, especially at the high school level, is I've tried to build a coaching staff that have, guys that, who, we all kind of fit, we fit the pieces together, right? And I think we're much better coaches today than when we first started out with just dealing with our individual athletes, And the other thing too that people can't lose sight of is that football is a primal game, right? And it doesn't and people don't always respond well to like they don't hear you, right? They don't actually hear you unless you're you're using your outside voice, right? And it's so there's a lot of pieces to unravel there.
Yeah, that's fair. I'm curious about job offers. So. Coach, you had success in the women's game. You've had success in high school. With success, especially sustained success, which is hard to do. Naturally, you're going to have people hit you up and say, "Hey, would you help us out?" Or, would you coach this team? Would you be willing to relocate, et cetera, et cetera. So I'm curious, how much has that happened, or is that not happened as much as I would assume?
Yeah, I mean, it happens a little bit, and you have to kind of put yourself out there, right? That you're interested in different sort of things. I've had obviously, things come up over the years that, it's not what I want to do, right? I'm not at this point in time, I'm not in a position where I want to rebuild the program. So
day one stuff.
I've built, I along with the coaches that were before me and the coaches that we currently have and the players, we built something really special. And so that would be almost impossible for me at this point in time to walk away from. Right?
Gotcha. Different stage.
I mean, there's a lot of sweat equity there. There's a ton of pride. There's a ton of, there's, and I know furthermore what we've done for kids in the surrounding community by having, the viable program. And that would be, for me, really difficult to walk away from. It's like, every night I think as an adult, you want your head to hit the pillow and you want to feel good about what you're doing. And whatever that is for you. This is my personal philosophy. I know that that's what every day my head hits the pillow. I want to know that I've done more good than, harm, right? That I've helped more than I've taken, and so that for me would be, it would be almost almost no-go at this point in time, right? If anything, I would, the only way I would foresee myself getting out of football at the high school level where I'm currently at is that I would, move into another position administratively, but that's not anything that I have. That's not anything I'm ready to do. That's because kids are fun to be around. They keep you young and and it's always and it's really cool to know that you have a part in their life and you help them maximize and actualize their potential.
Yeah, Gotcha. So you're happy where you're at for now.
100%. Absolutely. Yeah. Yeah. No. And I think that's kind of, like you make the big time where you're at, right? Like, so wherever it is you are, you make it the best possible version of whatever it is you want it to be. And you get to make it in your own image and likeness. And so, and I just think you just got to focus on where you're at and take care of that. And then everything else kind of takes care of itself. I think oftentimes people are looking for something else and they're not making the necessary deposits in the current organization that they're in. That's my opinion. Outsider looking in, and that's just something, and it's because I think that the brain is wired to say like, maybe I should do this, maybe I should do that. But it's or you could just stay here, right, and make this the best possible version of
There's nothing
itself.
wrong with it. Why leave? Yeah.
Yeah. So and so it doesn't happen much, and I'm not really, my ideal would be, I guess, I'll stay there for as long as they'll allow me to, and then old coaches never die; they just fade away. I kind of hope that's when I'm in the third phase. I hope I just kind of fade away, right? Like, hey, it's a good run. I'll see you guys later, right? I'll catch you on the other side.
Yeah. Well, my last nosy question about job offers would be, what if you were offered a college coaching job at the biggest college in Illinois? You know what I'm saying? So like if you live in Chicago,
Sure.
I don't know what the biggest college, maybe it is University of Illinois, but if you were offered some kind of coaching thing where it was a pretty generous offer, OC or head coach, something like that. I know it's kind of far fetched, but who knows? Would you entertain that, or it would be hard to leave high school because you have so much invested?
Yeah. I mean, well, obviously, I mean, it's it would be obviously flattering, and I think that sometimes I wax you, Wayne. You're like, what would it be like to just do football full time, right? And but the other part of me says, do you end up in this vacuum where that's all? Like, you still have to evolve as a human being, right? And that's the tough part about being a coach, right? Like, you still have to go to movies, right? Like, spend time with your family, right? Go out to dinner. And I feel like that there's a real trade-off with those guys, and they do a fantastic job. But the short answer is, obviously, I think any football coach who really loves doing it would be lying to say that, it'd be great to do that, right? But that's outsider looking in. I also should say this. I once thought it would be great to be like a professional wrestler, right? And so, but so like, and then I got older, I was like, and this is not a knock on professional wrestlers. We were just talking about them as coaches. I'm like, can you imagine? That seems like a great life. Like when I was a kid, I'm like, that's a great life. You're in a new city every night, right? But you know what, like, you have to go through to get to that level. And then every day you got to get that jacked up, right? Like, and put on your best performance. It's got to be exhausting, right? It looks really cool from the outside, but it's got to be so exhausting. And I think that's, the part of it looks glamorous, but I don't know if it is as glamorous as people would think, right? And that's the part that, and I've talked to a lot of college guys. They love their jobs, right? But like, you're on 24/7. You're never stop recruiting. And so where I am at, there's a natural break. Football season's over. We take a couple weeks off, and then we go to the weight room. And it's, and I like my seasons, right? And then to say earlier on, like, I don't want to do anything that's going to, at this point in time. So my daughter is a freshman. I have a 12-year-old and a 9-year-old, right? 2 boys. And I just don't want to do anything that's going to take away from being around those guys, especially, in 10 years, they won't care if I'm around, right? But right now they care that I'm around, right? I'll be like, hey, are you guys going out? I thought we'd hang out. I'm like, no, I'm going out, Dad. See you later. All right, let's be here in the house, right? Like, do the same thing I did to my dad. Like, hey, you guys want to hang out? No, we're leaving. Like, we're going to go hang out with our buddies.
Yeah. You're a wise man. That's a good answer.
I don't know about that. So I don't know. I think about a lot of things, but that's
according to me.
Pardon me?
According to me, you're a wise man.
Yeah. If you have some other people, maybe not so much. Yeah. No, I mean, I think that I just, life's about learning, right? And so you watch guys do certain things and who have success, and it's like, well, what was the cost of that success, right? Because there's always a cost, right? Like,
yep.
And like, I read a story once where Woody Hayes, had this coaching staff, and they were all married. I don't know. This is like I'm paraphrasing here. They're all married, and at the end of X amount of years, like the vast majority of those guys, like that's if the job costs you that's not worth it, right? Like if you go home and like there people used to be there, they're no longer there. That to me is like, that's not something that I want to be part of, right? And very avoidable, right? And that's not to say that other people do things a lot differently, and that's just I know where I'm at in this phase of my life, right? I'm happy, and I love doing what I'm doing. There are obviously days that you're like, no, just like anybody, right? I was like, it's tough days, and there's other days, but I wake up and I go, I'm ready to get after it, every day, and hopefully put the best possible team out in the field, and that kids are having a good experience doing it.
Well, you make a good point. High school is the highest level of football where you can still have balance in your life. College, NFL, there isn't really much balance. And so it's pretty much the highest level you can be at where you still have that luxury. And so it makes complete sense to me. And I have no perspective because I've only coached women's football. So I've never coached high school or college or anything else, a little bit of semi-pro men's, but mostly just women's. And so I appreciate that perspective. My next question for you is, what do you miss about the women's game? What do you not miss about the women's game? And do you keep up with the women's game?
Yeah, what do I miss? I miss the relationships.
Yeah.
Yeah, I miss the taking somebody like we had a running back. Her name was Brandy Hatcher, who.
Yeah, I know Brandy.
Yeah. She couldn't catch a cold, right? Like honestly, she couldn't, and she'll probably get mad if she hears this, and I'll tell her I said it. But we worked with her, right? We worked with her. She caught 55 balls, right, one year, right? Like, and she could not catch a football, right? And we worked, and she had some unique way to catch it, but we ended up getting her to a situation where she caught a ton of passes, right? And like players like that, that you have the opportunity to interact with, like Jamie Menzik, who was the MVP twice in the World Championship games in 2010 and 2013. Obviously players like that whole offensive line that I had, and defensive players, and then the different relationships that you have with the coaches that you meet from different walks of life. Bill Smith, who was our assistant coach, who's now since passed away, and Mark McLaughlin, who was a coach in Wisconsin, who's since passed away, and like that's the part that I think that I miss the most. Just the relationships. You get to know people. You get to know them on a different level. You get to see them grow up, right? The parts that I don't miss, the bus rides, right? Like, the grind, like, hey, we're flying, are we driving? What are we doing? No, this is 8-hour trip on a bus. That doesn't sound all that appealing to me anymore, but I did it, right? And it was fun. There were parts of it that were fun, but
I still am doing it.
Yeah, right. And then what was the third part? Do I still keep up with it?
Yeah.
Not really. I mean, a little bit. I mean, I know that Boston's obviously still really good, and Odessa's team is the Texas Elite, right? Nice job, and they're very good as well. But other than that, I don't really spend as much time with it as obviously as I used to. I don't have a team anymore. When I was doing it, I was all in all day. I still really appreciate it. I think it's it's an awesome opportunity for women, and I'm obviously proud of my time participating in as a coach of women's football. I think we really we did our part trying to elevate the game in Chicago, and I think we were able to accomplish a lot of the things that we wanted to, and just like anything else, we all were moving into different phases of our life, right? And it was time to say, well, maybe not bye forever, but until we meet again, type deal, right? Maybe again, but not any time in the foreseeable future.
Yeah. I want to know what your pet peeves are as a coach, and I want you to touch on coaching Sammy Grisafi, Gore, and Jeanette Gray.
Sure.
All legends in their own right, but all very different players. And so I just wanted you to touch on those three.
Sure, absolutely. My pet peeves as a coach?
Yes.
Yeah. There's a couple.
Go ahead.
No, really the player that is talented but refuses, either intentionally or unintentionally, they don't listen, right? And like I've explained it to you, I've coached it through you, I've showed it on film, and now we're in a situation where I'm at an impasse. I don't know what to do, right? Yeah. And usually that's a teaching issue, and you can't give up on that. But that's one. I've actually have, like, for me, it's just, I always ask, like, you're going to give my max effort, please just give me your max effort, right? And and that's like that. I guess would probably be the only thing that would ever really upset me is that it's clear that you're not giving a great effort here, right? And I've been very fortunate that I can't really remember that ever really happening outside of maybe a practice. But and there's not really that. But nothing that like really bothers me at this stage in my career. People talking when I'm talking kind of bothers me, but I don't really let it, like, hey, I'm speaking. Can you just, hold the phone or whatever it is that you're doing? So I'm done. I wouldn't say there's anything that really officials. No, they do a great job. They have a tough job, but they probably would say that I'm their pet peeve. And that's another thing that, what we should have talked about, Terry, is that I spent a ton of time learning what the officials do, what their jobs are. And so then I became like friends with officials, and like I would just pepper them with questions. Like, so I had to learn, so I started to learn their mechanics, and I would read the rule book, and then I'd watch like training DVDs that they were using with officials, just because I wanted to be well-versed when somebody came to me and they're like, no, that's not the rule. Well, no, that is the rule. And our rules with the women's game were a little bit different than the high school game. I thought about that as I said officials. To talk about the three players that you mentioned, Jeanette Gray, Gore, and Sammy.
Yep.
Yeah, wow. That's I'm talking about being lucky, right? Jeanette was a basketball player out of, Northwest Indiana, and I still talk to Jeanette. Jeanette actually just taught my daughter so she teaches at the local high school here, and Jeanette's she works in the career tech area, and so my daughter just finished up a CAD class, like 3D printing, sort of. And Jeanette was actually a teacher, and Jeanette was awesome to have because we're in the same profession, right? And so her dad was a coach, and she played sports at high level, and she was just she was a really kind of a dream to have, right? And she was always very into taking care of herself and her physical fitness, and taking care of her body, and and she just continued to hone the craft. So we still talk, her and I, every now and again, and she was coaching for a while, and we would talk about the different sort of nuances that are associated with coaching, and she caught a ton of balls for us, and it was a problem for a lot of people. She was a very reliable target, and she was very athletic, but she made herself even more athletic, but always be in the right place, right? You could count on her, and that it was very easy. I would say that all three of these players, it was very easy for me to coach them because they listened and they worked to apply what it was that I asked them to do, whatever it was. And Jeanette would fall into that category. And I don't think I ever really had a whole lot of. She always did what she was supposed to do, right? There wasn't a whole lot of me saying, "God bless it, Jeanette. What are you doing?"
Yeah.
Right? There was one time where she didn't catch a punt in a film session. I might have asked her 30 times where it would be if she would just fair caught the punt. But after that, we didn't have that issue again. But she did a fantastic job for us. She was, awesome to be around. And she's a great person. And, she was able to take her skill set in basketball and really to apply it to football. Gore was, she came to us after Sammy retired for a year, and she was much different quarterback than Sammy. I mean, Rachel was, so athletic, right? So athletic, so fast, and tough. And she made me think a little bit differently about how we ran the offense. We had to do some different things to utilize her skill set. But gosh, she was dynamic and such a competitor. Wanted to be really good at anything that she did. And she did a fantastic job for us at quarterback for those, those couple of years that she was at the helm. And we were able to, have sustained success, while, Sammy had, walked away and I didn't think she was going to come back. And that was, and so what was nice for Rachel, what she didn't realize is that at the same time I had a young man by the name of Clint Rakovich play quarterback who had the boys, it was the young man that I referenced early on. He was the number one fullback going into this NFL draft and he tore his ACL. And so we had him play quarterback for us. And this is the kind of the cool part about having the back-to-back season. So I had Clint and then I had Gore. And so they had very similar styles. So I just used what we used with Clint and I had Rachel run the same stuff. And so then I would have Rachel watch the film of Clint running the offense. And then, we would just go out there and we would execute. And, she made me look like a much better coach at times because of her athleticism. That's for sure. Yeah. And then Sammy, and it's pretty well documented that, I'd say early on we had oil and water would be a great way to describe our relationship. And now we're, as we both grew up, right? Like that's what had to happen. Like we both grew up, we both realized that we needed each other to evolve in the game. And, once we both stopped butting heads, it was nirvana. It was poetry in motion. It doesn't get better than that. For me, that's the part that I miss from the women's game is that I was able to have the same quarterback for multiple years. And we were able to grow and evolve and develop a relationship that transcended football where we moved from, we became friends, right? And, and appreciative of each other's art, right? And then it was, I just messaged her the other day. She, thanks for teaching me something. I'm like, hey, listen, the teacher learns more from the pupil sometimes than the pupil learns from the teacher, right? And that's would be the case with Sammy. She was coached in Redlands, California, and she played with the boys there. And so, she was used to some of, the different styles. She didn't always respond great to it. And, we figured out a way to, more than coexist. I mean, once we figured out that we both had each other's best interests at heart, we made it work and we made, we had some amazing seasons together. I mean, that 2013 season was just, that one is, I don't know if anyone would be able to touch what we were ever able to do that particular year. And obviously we had a great supporting cast. But yeah, that's the part that I probably missed the most, I guess, is from the coaching standpoint, is to be able to have somebody over multiple years where they come in and they're learning what it is. You guys are, and then you have to lose some of your own ego, right? And in order to continue to move the relationship forward. And that she was just I can't say enough great things about her. And then those are those moments that we, obviously with all the athletes that we had, but those moments that, we had together, and it was awesome because we were all getting better at the same time. And it was, I was getting better as a coach, they were getting better as players. And, and I think everyone, now realizes that, but at the time we were just, we were ultra focused on, what the goal was. And, we were able to, do some pretty awesome things. And, Sammy and I actually had Gore on the 2013 team, and Sammy was with us in 2010 and 13 on the U.S. national teams, and we were able to take that show on the road and do some pretty amazing things there as well. But yeah, though, Sammy's she's up there as one of the all-time faves, and really, I mean, if everyone should have the opportunity one time to coach somebody like her, in the sense that you're going to have somebody who's a complete extension of the coach once you win her over, right? And once I did, it was I was her and she was I guess, and I don't know if that's that makes sense. But when she walked out there, she was me, right? She was, and and she was the field general, and you can't win without a quarterback who takes ownership and pride over it. And I mean, honestly, there's Allison Cahill is a fantastic quarterback, and some other quarterbacks are fantastic. And I want to ton of championships, and but Sammy is right up there with the elite. And I would tell people this all the time. The elite level players that we have in women's football, if they were men, they would be 100 millionaires, right? And that's the sometimes the sad thing to think about when you start to think about women's football, because it has the level of exposure, and we're still working to grow the game, and get more people to see it. And the hope is that eventually we'll be in a place where you can see some fantastic football at a very high level.
Yeah. Yeah, well said. What would you say are the main differences between coaching males versus females?
Sure. John, I think it's a question I answered a million times. It's a fair one too. So you wouldn't even say it's men versus women. I'd say it's adult versus adolescents, right? So adults listen, right? And adolescents, they listen differently, right? They listen like I'm gonna tell a kid something in June that I'm going to be saying the same thing in November, right? It's like maybe you've heard this once or a million times, but maybe you might want to try to do that. So, and then that standpoint, I would say, that's a question that's it's a fair question, but it's a question that I always say that it was a lot easier. It's a lot easier in many regards to coach adults because they just are. And they're professionals, and they're professionals outside of outside of the sport, and because of that, it's much they're honed in, they're ready to go, and with that part was always very easy.
Gotcha. That makes a lot of sense to me. Who do you watch, Coach? You don't watch much of the women's game. Who do you watch? Do you watch NFL? Do you watch college? Do you watch schemes? Is it strictly nerd stuff? What do you watch for pleasure? What football do you watch?
Yeah, so that's
other high schools, obviously.
Yeah, right. So I watch a lot of football, right? Other high schools. I mean, I guess I have to, I'll watch a college. So I don't watch as much football as people. I always tell that to people. I'm like, I don't watch as much football as you probably think I would. For a while there, I would have said it was, watched a lot of Notre Dame, being Midwesterner and Southside Catholic League guy, and the Bears, who break my heart all the time, right? It's like I mean, I'm a Bears fan because 1985, right? And I've been holding on to that since I was in third grade, right? And they got me, like I'm hooked, right? Like I can't be a fan of anybody else, like that just feels weird. But I guess I would say that I watch a lot of. I watch a lot of. I will tell you, I watch a lot of games where some of my kids are playing. So I have a young man that was at Northern Illinois. I had two this past year at Northern Illinois. Trayvon Rudolph is a wide receiver there. Watched a lot of Northern Illinois football games. Before that, I was had a kid at Notre Dame, so I watched a lot of Notre Dame games. If I know one of my guys is going to be on TV, so I have a wide receiver in the USFL right now, Lance Lenore. So I've watched some USFL games. And we have a kid who was playing in Canada on the Edmonton Elks. So if they're we get the TSN broadcast, I'll watch them that. So I watch a lot of those games, right? Because kids that I coach that are now men, and I still refer to them as kids, and they're 27. But for me, they're always I still remember them as 16-year-old young men, and so I would say that I do a lot of that. I watch a lot of Kent State. So if you aren't familiar with who the head coach is, his name's Sean Lewis, and he has some ties to the Art Briles Baylor program. And they are really fun to watch. They run really fast. They're not a lot of people probably will watch them. I love it because and then I have some good relationships with the coaches on their staff, so I've been able to learn some different things that they do. But they're a team that if they're on, I'm watching them right now. That's and that's probably like the weirdest, like people like Kent State, like they run some really fantastic things, and they're running some things really, really fast. That would be the other team that I watch a lot of. They'll watch their games actually on tape. And then if I find out that there's somebody who's doing something unique special teams wise, then I'm gonna nerd out on that. A couple years ago I was watching it was Arkansas State, right? They had a special teams coordinator who's doing some really unique stuff. So I watched a bunch of Arkansas State games. Like it's, and this goes all the way back to when I was a kid, when I was trying to watch University of Houston stuff with David Klingler and Andre Ware. They were running the run and shoot, and they were throwing the ball all over the yard. Like no one knew who they were except for me. Right in my neighborhood, no one never heard of the University of Houston. And or when I was watching the World Football League on the USA Network, and I had a Barcelona Dragons hat. I don't know if you remember that.
Yeah,
yeah. I would watch those guys. Like I just that's the sort of stuff that I watch. I'm watching a lot of stuff no one else is watching when it comes to I guess it was like a lot of people like I watch Michigan or this that. And like, what are you watching? Penn State, Northern Illinois, and those are great games. But I think you can learn a lot from watching that game. If you were going to ask me what I watch more of, I would say I watch more college than I do pro, because I feel like there's a lot more creativity in the college game than there is in the pro game. And it feels like they're more willing to do some things that are outside of the box.
Yeah. Gotcha. Understood. Last two questions. I appreciate your time. What do you think about out-of-state players? So players that are in the women's game, obviously, but they live in a different state. They're flying in, for practices, for games, just that whole concept. I'm pretty sure you've dealt with that before. But the Denver Bandits didn't have that ever until this season. But we actually had 3 players flying, ironically, from Chicago. So we had Frenchie, Kelly Washington, and Nicole Matheson.
You're
familiar with them. So they flew to Denver, for practices at least once a month, and then for all the games wherever they were, which is impressive. I mean, it's obviously not cheap to do that. What is your opinion of that? Do you think it's just a luxury some teams have? Do you think there should be a limit on it? What is your opinion?
I'll tell you the same thing I told everybody else when we had international players coming to play for us.
Yeah.
What happened to the U.S. auto market when they tried to stop imports to coming into our country, right? Like, they tried to stop.
Yeah,
it wasn't good, right? It wasn't good, right? What did it do? It wasn't good at all, right? Like, and so if you want your product, which women's football, to be at its best, right? There's currently no place for those individuals to play, right? So what should they do? Not be able to play, or have an opportunity to? I never had a problem with. We had players come to us from Finland, Poland, Australia, Norway, and Canada, and I didn't think that was ever a big deal, because we were offering something that anyone could offer, and we were offering an opportunity for, players to get better, right? And I never have an issue with it, and I think that in my opinion, if you want the game to grow, that you need to try to continue to put the best product on the field. And anything else, any sort of protectionisms that you put in, it seems like at face value, it's for the greater good. In my opinion, it's not for the greater good. And let's take this to the larger scope, right? So in the NFL, Charles Haley, I don't know how many NFL Super Bowls he played for, but like, it was a guy that I remember for like 3 years in a row was getting signed in the latter part of the NFL season to play on a team, right? And, and he contributed, right? And he wasn't with that team all year, but he got signed, and so be it. They would put him on the team, and, go right ahead. Same thing is true with, if I go to the baseball park right now, I throw 100 miles an hour, right? Which is, by the way, not going to happen. But if I did, right? So the guy threw 100 miles an hour, right? And the White Sox called me up tomorrow, right? Like, hey, we want you to play what is that? Is that bad? But that's fine. I guess, no, like, you want the best product on the field, right? And so that's, and you have to then also take into like the capital outlay that those players have to put themselves through in order to get to those places. I think that's, you want more of that, right? In a game that's shrinking in many regards, you want to try to keep as many people involved in it for as long as possible. And, and so I guess, I'm all for as open as it could possibly be, right? Yeah. But I feel like protectionisms, and as everybody's, because they would put rules in place, and all right, we'll work within the constraints of your rules, right? But like, at the end of the day, what are you doing, right? Yeah. Like, if you have to be X amount of games, all right, I get that, X amount of practices, I guess. but does it really matter? Like if the person's not with the team all year, do they really understand the scope and sequence of the playbook? Right? Football's a different game. Like you have to know what it is that you're doing, right? Like there isn't a, it's not basketball where one player can take over the court. It doesn't happen in football. The best teams win, and and people can prove me wrong, but they won't be able to because it's the best teams that win. Obviously, a lot of those teams have stars, but so the short answer is, and from a very long explanation is, let as many people play as they want to play.
I agree. This year was the first time with Denver Bandits where we had a handful of players playing from out of state and also a handful of players internationally. One from Australia, one from, two from Mexico, one from Brazil, et cetera, et cetera. And so I've never dealt with that before. And obviously it was awesome. It was awesome to have them, have their talents, have them relocate. I mean, it was impressive that they were able to pull it off. But I've heard through the grapevine, some people have different opinions about it. So I just wanted to ask you,
so people have different opinions about a lot of things, right? But the reality is, if you want to really grow the game, think about what you just said, right? Mexico, right? Where else? Australia,
Brazil,
Brazil, right? If you really want to grow the game, they're going to go back to their countries and they're going to say, well, this is what they're doing in the United States, right? And and then they're ambassadors of the game, and that's what we really want. And the same is true with the domestic players. If they want to play wherever it's a free market. You should be able to play where you want to play. If you have the financial capital to do it, then go right ahead. I have no problem doing it at all. And I wouldn't tomorrow. If I were to start a team tomorrow, I would have no problem doing it. Right? Like it's just But then I also believe that like when you put protections in place, it ruins things, right? Like and that was what I would say. That's what I was saying even when we were people who had issues with foreign players and whatnot, and we didn't even know. They just like, hey, can we come play for you? Like, I mean, I guess sure, right? I have relatives that live in Chicago. Sure, if you want to come here, I mean, we'll teach you, and thankfully, some of them were, outstanding football players, right? It helps out a lot, right? But that's, it's a wonderful exchange for your own players too, right? Like, we have players from Finland, and then you develop relationships and you have friendships that, that you go to their, I follow some of the players on, obviously different social media, and they're meeting up in the different, different countries, and it's this becomes this, fantastic, collegial environment that, that everybody continues to grow the game. And that's ultimately what we want to do, right? Is to grow the game.
Yeah. Agreed. Last question, Coach. When I came to visit you in Chicago, watch you play Boston, I observed you. You were very gracious to let me chill on the sideline and have a front row seat to that clash. It was a great game, well worth my plane ticket. But not only did I observe your nature of being, very assertive and aggressive and, alpha as a coach, also I got to observe how you coached. So I remember kind of going fast on offense and you yelling out certain calls, right? Like Pittsburgh or whatever the call was, right? And then I knew that word meant a certain formation or a certain play. And so I'm very curious about that. You and the St. Louis coach are the only coaches I can think of that I have kind of a resource to reach out to, because I think that's the next evolution of me as a coach is, when you talk about playing checkers versus chess, that's kind of part of it, right? It's seeing the defense, reading the defense, seeing a soft spot, calling the play live for, no huddle, stuff like that. And so what can you say? Give me a crash course real quick about how you would talk about signal calling and calling an offense as fast as possible, or having no huddle. Like how would you describe that? I know it's kind of a loaded question, but how would you describe that as a coach, the philosophy behind it, and help me brainstorm, how am I going to, do certain arm signals, certain words, how am I going to put it all together in an efficient way where I'm not doing double work?
It's a fair question. There's a lot there. So, we just started, I guess we started dabbling with it and messing around with it, in short spurts. And then we started to kind of develop a language that was our own. Yeah. And, so we would use a word, right? And that meant that we were running a particular play. So I think one year we were jailbreak to the left was lettuce, right?
Yeah.
But it might have also been that we were also, lettuce meant that we were in a certain formation and we might also have a motion tag, right, attached to it, right? So, we would just yell out lettuce and everybody knew what they were supposed to do, right? And so, but obviously the brunt of that took place in the practice time teaching. And then it all had to like make sense. And that was like, that's the part that it's taken years to do, right? Like we created a language, and then there's obviously words that you use, and the philosophy behind that is every word that you use is equal to 2 seconds. So therefore you want to cut down on your verbiage. So I might yell out before I would go ram, yo-yo, delta, right? Yo-yo delta, then it would be like, counter, right? I would yell all of that out, right? And then it was like, well, we'll just say a White Sox, right? And and that was a lot easier. So that tag was, 3x1, the Y went in motion when we were running, counter. And then you built like whatever it is. Some guys do colleges, some coaches do, cities. It just sort of all kind of, worked. And it really, then I let the players start to come up with and then we would add new things. And then I was like, I would be at practice and I'd say, honestly, I have no intellectual capital left. Right, I don't even know a word to use for this play. And I asked what do you want to call it? And I found out really quickly, you could never ask Sammy Grisafi what we wanted to call it, because it was always going to be something that was close to being inappropriate. I'm like, I'm not saying that. Yeah. I'm not saying that out loud. I'm not screaming that. Like, let's think of something else. And that was the fun times with Sammy. It was like, but you would develop. So we developed the verbiage, we developed the words. So it was, like formation driven. And then we would do like some warp speed stuff. So I might just call out like Florida, and it was 3 separate consecutive plays. And, play number 1 was a high percentage play. Play number 2 was a high percentage play. And then play number 3 was a third down play if we got to it. And it was really messed around with it. But the main brunt of all of that takes place in practice. And so the beauty of running the no huddle in practice is that you get so much more reps. Yeah. Right. Once you decide on what it is, like, so if I were going to start over tomorrow with it, I would, it'd be, obviously a lot of it's R and L, right and left dictated, and you have to decide what your right and left is. It could be as simple as right and left words, or it could be something like, Atlanta is your left, and the Falcons are the city, and then the team are your right, and and you just kind of go from there. But you build it, and then you just kind of make it your own. But like, it has to go back to like, does it fit? So I guess before all that, it's like, what do you want to run, right? And then how are you like? So we only carry a handful. So we only carry, like, people ask me how many plays we have. I would say that we have like 4 run plays. And, a handful of screens, I don't know, 3, 4, and then, a handful of pass plays, right? And it's not a voluminous playbook at all. And anybody's ever watched any of my teams ever play, they have to know that, I guess. Maybe they do, maybe they don't. But it's how you present the plays, right? Like, and you can get to, so if you want to run counter out of like quads 4x1, right? So what are you going to call that? You're going to, and then you just kind of build it from there. And I guess you just got to practice it like crazy. And I don't really wish I had a better answer. I did a lot of reading, like when I started doing the huddle stuff, and there was a lot of great books that I ran across. And then, at the end of the day, it just became, I had to start. And I started with, like green was our first, like when the early, like, infant stages of it. Green was our run play. So if I was yelling green, the blue was going to be our pass play. It was just tagged, right? So we would just run it randomly, like green, 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 and it would be, we'd be running counter, right? But it was just because I was yelling green, and that was what we tagged. And then blue was a play that we called 80X choice, and everybody lined up and ran the play. And then as time has evolved, we've added more to that, and then week to week I add different things. So that are the same but different, and we then just practice those words, and then we practice those plays, and And that's, and I always try to, run the same stuff, but presented in different manners on a weekly basis. And sometimes I go back and I watch old film and I'm like, I don't even remember running that, right? Like, I'm running it that way. That's interesting. Why did we stop? It was just, for me, it was kind of a one-off, and, I just never really went back to it. And my players actually never question me on that sort of stuff. I wonder why they don't, but, but because we keep the same base, right? And then we just present it in a million different ways. And then, so I would show up with the women, I would show up on Monday and I would have my packet. I'd go, this is how we're going to run, our sprint out game this week. This is how we're going to run, counter this week. These are some new-ish plays for us, except it's not going to change anything for the offensive line, right? Because you want them to play fast and you want them to be able to know exactly what they're doing. I guess so. I don't really know if I have a great answer to that, but
no, I'll take it.
Like whatever.
I'll take it.
Yeah, no, I mean, so whatever it is, you want to be consistent, right? And I think you just have to know, like, where people get stopped is they don't know where to start, right? Yeah, and that's the most difficult part. It's just like, there's a
paralysis by analysis.
Yeah, there was a book I read once that said something like, hey, if you're going to wait till it's perfect, you're never going to ship it. Just ship, right? Like, you know what I'm saying? Like, and so, like, I guess you gotta break some plates, right? You gotta figure out what works for you, and then you have to be able. So one year the kids like flip flopped an outside zone play for me. So then whole year I had to, like, in my head I was like, that's left, but somehow they made this right this year. And I don't even know how it happened, right? But my coach was like, what did you do? I'm like, somehow I got screwed up at practice. Right? I never fixed it, right? We had to run. We were calling the opposite thing one year, and the kids are like, next year I'm like, guys, we ran that play the wrong way all year, but you guys flipped it, and I didn't challenge you on flipping it, and then I had to live with that in my head for a whole year. And so I guess that's an example, like, you breaking some plates, right? And then, the nice part with women is that when you have the consistency of your roster, you can build on that really quickly. The difficult part is to, like, the initial building block. What's nice about the high school level is that I bring the 9th, 10th, 11th, 12th graders. I teach them all at the same time so that everybody knows exactly what it is we're going to be running, how we're going to call it. And that way they're running it as freshmen, sophomores, and then obviously the juniors, seniors.
Gotcha.
And then that would be, and then if you find something you like, go with it. But just for whatever, it's your own language. You get to create your own language. So what's nice is that, like, my players that I've had over the years, they'll show up at my boys' games and, like, you're going to run. I'm like, how'd you know? Like, well, we heard you. Like, I'm like, oh, well, maybe it means something else. Like, it didn't. I'm like, all right, well, fair enough, right? Like, so, that they get a kind of a kick out of it when they show up to the games. And they're like, hey, still running some of the same stuff. And I'm not telling anybody anything they don't already know. I run the same. I run a lot of similar things. And then that's, like, I just try, because I want to be efficient, right? So I want to be efficient and productive, and you don't need a ton of plays, and I want to run those plays as well as possible. And if they're working, great. And if they're not, well, I always tell people, do you have a play call sheet? I'm like, I do. If I'm looking at it, we got problems.
Yeah.
Right? Like, like we got real problems. Like, we have, like, it's like we're digging deep here, because either it's not working or I don't have the answers. And thankfully I haven't been in a situation where I've had to use that play call sheet. I've laminated it every week though, and I update it and I write notes, but I don't use it. Like, it's in my back pocket, and it falls out invariably during the game. And the coach is like, you want this? Like, keep it. Right. So anyways, no, it's, I guess I don't even know if I answered your question.
No, you did. You did. I appreciate you, man. So I took more of your time than I was planning on, so I apologize for that. I know,
honestly, I could talk for another 2 hours.
So could I.
I mean, because when it comes to this, football, like, there's just so much to it, right? And there's, I mean, I don't know. I think I was listening to a guy said like 66 different positions, including, right, special teams, something to that effect. I mean, when you think about it, like, there's a lot that goes into this game, and it's different than. I know there's other sports that might be a little more technical, like hitting a baseball is the hardest thing you can do, right? But at the end of the day, baseball is baseball, right? Like, and there's not a lot of iterations. You throw football into the deal. Whoa, as soon as it starts, right? Like, and when you talk about triple option, like I had heart palpitations, right? Like, oh my gosh, you got to stop the triple option, right? Like that's a whole, like you could have a whole master's class in stopping the triple option
Seriously.
and in running the triple option, right?
Yeah.
Like, and it's like, and that's what's awesome about our game is that like, for me, I want to, we had Sammy, but what people didn't really realize is that I wanted to run the ball. Right, like I had, but Sammy was a great piece. You'd sling it all over the place. And sure, could we throw it 60 times a game? Absolutely. But we didn't have to, right? And if we needed to, we threw it, and and we did a lot of very efficient things and got the ball in and got it out, and but you can do things a lot of different ways. And sometimes we would just line up and say, you know what, we think we're bigger than you, and we're just gonna maul you, right? And like that's cool too. And and then there's other people who, defensively they're going to be hyper aggressive, or there's other teams, like you look at like teams like that want to blitz it all the time. They're running a 30 stack, and that causes you some different fits. Or there's other teams who are playing like match quarters, and it's just like there's so many different nuances that are involved in the game, and I think that's what as a coach keeps you going, right? Like, and then you see something like, I like that. We're gonna. How do I run that with what it is that we're currently running?
Yeah.
And that's for me is usually the difficult part. I'll spend a lot of time studying something. Like a couple of years ago, I went on a deep dive on using wings in the counter game, and I spent a lot of time on it. And I didn't even use it. Like I didn't do it, right? Like I didn't do it at all. But like but I spent time on it, and it was like I was watching something today on Ferris State, and how they run the counter game. I really enjoy how they run that, and it's like, and then can we run it, and how do we go about getting it in? And that's that's probably the thing about this game, because you could talk about the minutia and idiosyncrasies that are associated with this game, and that's like the broad strokes. But then you have to take it down to the individual player, right? Like, and what their role and responsibility is, and that's a whole different deal. And then how do you assess, like, if I walked into if I threw on your game film, I would have a plan of how I wanted to attack, your upcoming opponent, but not everybody else sees it the same way as you do. And then that's, to me, it's really like the cool part about it. And I like to hear how other people go about their process and try to prepare for their opponents. And I think that, you obviously, I know that you learn a lot from just, listening. I feel like I talked a lot here, but it's kind of the format today, but I appreciate it, and I think that I appreciate your commitment to women's football, and I hope that it continues to grow, and globally, I hope that just the game continues to grow. I mean, obviously we had some numbers issues there for a while with CTE and stuff, but I hope that everybody realizes that we're trying to make the game as safe as possible, and that it's a game that's worth your while. And
it's a beautiful game.
There are, what's that?
It's a beautiful game.
It is. It's a game that's, I think it gives you, there's definitely more positives than negatives associated with it. Obviously, there's some, extreme examples with some, the CT issues and those sort of things. But, I mean, I'm not, that's a different conversation for a different time. But, I know this, that coaches listen and they make the appropriate modifications to their training when they find out that, there's issues associated with it. And so I know that the game is safer than it's ever been. And even at the high school level, I mean, we almost never tackle to the ground. Like doesn't happen in our practice. I mean, we tackle bags. We do a lot of like walkthrough stuff. There's not a whole lot of, it's not like when I played where like every day was a war, right? Like, I mean, it's, so if we can continue on that continuum, then, it's awesome for this game. And, I hope that I hope it continues on. So, hopefully people like yourself continue to stay involved in it. And, maybe someday I'll make my way back into the women's game, but when I'm done coaching, Little League baseball and high school football, so I appreciate it.
Yeah, sounds good, man. Well, I'll definitely use you. If you don't mind, I'm going to hit you up more often. I think I thought of that a couple years ago, but I always feel like I'm going to be bothering you. But next season, I'm definitely going to pick your brain a little bit and maybe send you some film and just get bounce some stuff off you if you don't mind.
Yeah, no, it's anytime. And I would say it to anybody. Like, there's one thing that I had a lot of people help me out, right? And I mean, I had a lot of people teach me things, and I'm more than willing to, if anybody ever has, if I have time, right? Like, obviously time is always, the precious commodity, right? But if you have time and you're, like when you asked me, I was jumped at the opportunity, because honestly, I mean, I don't actually have a lot of people outside of my little, my circle of people ask a whole lot of questions about things. And that's, that's fine. But if somebody wants to know something, I have no problem, sharing as much as I can. Sometimes I forgot more than I remember, but, I mean, you ask about I can remember certain things about, my time in women's football. And I remember, and now at this point in time, I remember all the great things. And I think I forgot all the things that I didn't necessarily like about it. But yeah, anytime. Yeah. I mean, I would say that to anybody. I mean, if you have my information, you can reach out to me. And I'm very willing to help out in any way, shape, or form, because I know that it's not the easiest when, to cut through the, the kind of I don't know, through all the BS sometimes, sometimes you need to talk to somebody and say, well, what would you do here? Right. And that's, and honestly, the cool part about this is that football coaches share, and then you get some nuggets, and hopefully you can take them back, and the nice part
together. Yep.
Yeah, right. And that's and I wish you the best of luck. But hey, there's some books in there you should definitely, if you ever get a chance, that's 2 books that I referenced, the On Combat and On Killing by Lieutenant David Grossman. I mean, they are, talk about training. They're fascinating books. And then you work to apply the training. And I'll give you one nugget in there, and I think it's fascinating when you start talking about lowest level training. In there, he talked about a police officer who practiced every day to take a weapon, a wooden weapon from somebody in his house. And he'd take it, and he said that he must have done it thousands of times. He took the weapon, but he'd give it right back. He took the weapon, and he'd give it right back to whomever it was, I don't know, his wife or whoever was holding this, this wooden gun, right? It didn't, that part's not important, except the part that's important. He would take the weapon, he would take it from the armed assailant, and he would take it and he would give it right back, right? That's the important part. So they fast forward to it. And it's a part of the book that I really remember, amongst other things. And in the book, the same officer's involved in a armed robbery. And the assailant comes around with a weapon drawn. And he says, you can imagine the gentleman's surprise when I took the gun away from him. You also can imagine his surprise when I gave it right back.
I'd said the wrong thing. Yeah.
Yeah, right. Right. But then apply that to football, right? You ask players, right, to get on top of a fumble, but do you take the time to teach them how to do it?
Yeah.
Right. Do you ask players to score a touchdown, but do they physically score a touchdown when they run with the ball, or they just stop? Right. You ask players to, do any number of things, right? What do you do after you get a touchdown? What do we do if we want to, we're trying to run faster? Give the ball to the official, please, so we can run the next play, right? So, and those are the things as a coach you have to think about. And it's actually, I use reference that because they really changed my outlook on how I went about trying to find all the different nuances of coaching that I wasn't actually I talked about, but I never coached. That makes sense.
It does make sense.
Yeah.
Like you said, we could talk for 2 more hours, so I'll probably have you on again. Maybe we'll make it a yearly thing if you're down for that. But
anytime.
We'll be talking sooner than later.
Yeah. All right. We'll talk to you. Thanks for having me on. I appreciate it.
All right. Thanks, Coach.